So hello both of you and welcome along to our Mission Possible sofa. This is our kind of hub for Edie Live 2018 where we grab some time with some of the industry's leading lights and sustainability experts just to discuss the event so far, what they're going to be talking about, and I suppose the key sustainability drivers in their respected sectors. So joining me today, of course, we have Richard Black, Director of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, ECIU, and of course Melanie Coath, who is the Senior Climate Change Policy Officer at RSPB. So lots of acronyms again, right off the back. We had that quite a bit yesterday. So you are both on your way in around about half an hour to the Energy Innovation Theatre, where you're discussing, I suppose, the business case for renewables, why it's now the smart choice for businesses in a sense. And Richard, you've got quite a decorated career in regards to renewables as well.
I've left my medals off.
Yeah, I noticed you've been to quite a few kind of UN climate conferences. This is something you clearly know a lot about. In your mind, when did renewables go from they might become a smart choice to now they are the smart choice? How did that development happen?
I think it's really happened quite gradually over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. If we go back, for example, to the Copenhagen Climate Conference of 2009, one of the reasons I think why that failed to get a deal was because the major developing countries were not convinced that renewables were the route to a cheaper energy future. That's all changed round, and of course at the Paris conference we saw Modi of India launching the Indian-led solar initiative, which is a global alliance, has lots of African countries in it. And I think that's the big change that we've seen, really. It's now become the smart choice for developing countries, where previously it was unaffordable. And part of that is down to development work that's been done in Western countries. One thinks, for example, of Denmark and the UK in wind, Germany in solar. They've made the investments, they've got the innovation, prices have come down because of that, and now we're in a situation where the rest of the world can reap the benefit.
Okay, and Melanie, I mean, RSPB has a lot of kind of connotations with nature and stuff, so where does renewables fit in to your kind of climate and wider sustainability ambitions?
That's a really good question. So climate change actually we see as the greatest long-term threat to nature now. It's having such a profound impact on our ecological systems. So we know that 75% of the emissions globally come from energy supply in one form or another. So we have to be looking at clean energy if we're going to tackle climate change. And for us, we're looking at how we can combine kind of a clean energy future, 100% renewables, but also in ways that actually those renewable energy technologies are not harming wildlife. So really we're looking at ensuring that we tackle the climate crisis, but at the same time we're not contributing to the biodiversity crisis, and we're trying to bring together solutions that meet both of those.
And how is that balance? Is it quite a juggling act, or are you finding that it's actually been quite a streamlined process to embed?
Yeah, another good question. We didn't actually know the answer to that a couple of years ago. We did a big project which led to our 2050 energy vision, which was really to say, well, can we deliver our very tough climate targets in the UK and do that in a way that's in harmony with nature? And from my perspective as RSPB's climate policy lead, I was very happy to say the answer was yes. And we found that there are a number of different pathways you can take, where if you site renewables in areas that are not important for wildlife, and there are very many of those, you can actually have very high levels of renewable deployment, but actually make sure you're maintaining those areas for wildlife at the same time.
And obviously the UK has kind of emerged as a real kind of leader in renewables uptake. Like 2017 was a year where we smashed so many records in terms of renewable output, wind and solar and both. And it's quite surprising considering a couple of years ago the policy landscape was really a bit kind of depressing. There was lots of cuts to the feed-in tariffs. Lots of renewable technologies were kind of blocked from routes to market. So we're now starting to see renewables stand on their own 2 feet, which I suppose is the ideal aim. But how do both of you see the current policy landscape around renewables? Is there anything that should be done to incentivise, or are we where we should be? Richard?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. I mean, offshore wind is obviously going ahead, and the introduction of auctions has brought the costs down in a way that no one thought possible. Contracts being awarded literally half the price that they were going for 2 years previously. I think the two big gaping holes are on solar and on onshore wind. We're now in a slightly ridiculous situation where the government says it wants the cheapest energy available. We know that onshore wind is now the cheapest thing that we could build, and yet it's effectively prohibited because of planning regulations and because in the majority of cases don't have a route to market. There are some individual cases, of course, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about those at Edie Live today, where companies can conclude power purchase agreements. The same for solar, But so there is some subsidy-free onshore wind and solar happening, but it's very much at small scale. So I think, Claire Perry has hinted that she would like to see a return to onshore wind, planning restrictions lifted, a route to market opened. There's obviously some sensitivity about that in parts of the Conservative Party, but you have to go back to the data. The cheapest new thing we can build, only 2% of the population say they are strongly opposed to onshore wind. So this notion of a mass rebelling against onshore wind is a myth. It always has been a myth. So I think those would be the big two things to open up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We need to see an awful lot more onshore wind and solar, and our vision of how we can achieve a clean energy future in harmony with nature absolutely concludes that you need a lot more onshore wind and solar, and it's really possible to do that in harmony with nature. Solar, field-scale solar, for example, can be really exciting because you can actually create mini nature reserves around the actual photovoltaic cells. You can have wildflower meadows, you can have lovely hedgerow planting, you can create areas for skylarks, all of this kind of stuff, which really helps with public acceptability. So some people don't like the idea of solar farms in their neighbourhood, but if they realise there's wonderful wildlife benefits, actually that really helps you get community buy-in, and that kind of thing can be great. So these things, as long as they're kind of packaged right, can be really, really important, and government needs to do a lot more to help deliver that. And as Richard says, get us to make sure that we're taking advantage of the market economics at the moment, which say that we should be doing a lot more of that.
And we mustn't forget also that there is a third very important aspect of the countryside, which is to produce food for farmers. And again, it's quite interesting. If you talk to people from the National Farmers Union, for example, anecdotally, you've got sheep that actually quite like being in a field with solar panels because they can shelter underneath them in the wind and the sun. So that's another synergy that's possible.
Yeah, I think as a journalist, one of the images I always see when I search for kind of stock images of solar panels are the sheep fields and stuff. So it's clearly beginning to integrate, and I think as solar becomes more advanced, we see stuff like solar kind of facades or transparent solar cells sticking to the side of buildings. It becomes a lot less, I suppose, obtrusive or viewed as an eyesore, which is ideally where we get to go to. But I suppose for our viewers who are predominantly sustainability business professionals, is it enough to just kind of get the PPA agreements in place, make sure you're sourcing green energy deals, or is it now the business case that on-site renewable generation can lead to so many more business benefits, not only in terms of like net positive stuff, but also enable you to save money costs? Where does the business case for on-site renewables now lie, do you think? Melanie, perhaps start?
Well, it's interesting actually, because some of the economics around field scale solar, if you're doing it in a kind of in harmony with nature kind of way, are actually really significant. So for example, rather than having to, if you just maintain a regular kind of grass field around solar sites, that actually takes quite a lot of maintenance. You need to get tractors in 3 or 4 times a year to mow. That's costly. Whereas if you establish a more naturalised system, so you have kind of natural grassland, that doesn't need regular mowing. That can be combined with wildlife benefits and can be combined with agricultural benefits such as grazing, as Richard was saying, and actually these will bring the cost down. So it makes a lot of sense.
I think it depends very much on the nature of the business. It's partly a pattern of what's your pattern of energy usage. If your pattern of energy usage more or less follows the path of the sun, then obviously that makes the business case for solar much easier. If you're a heavy industrial user, that's sort of working 24 hours a day, the case is probably not quite there at the moment, or is it a lot more difficult? Depends on the ethics of your company as well, what you want to look like as a company, and so on and so forth. So I don't think we're there by a long way across the board, but clearly for some businesses it is the way to go.
And I suppose at a national level, we've got these kind of big stretching carbon budgets, the 80% carbon reduction, and renewables is pegged as a real major driver in that aspect. It's slowly gaining, I suppose, a majority share of the energy mix, slowly but surely, and soon we'll be at a point where renewables are the predominant energy source. What, I suppose, needs to happen in the future to ensure that this intermittent output is stable and fluctuated?
I think that you've really put your finger on it there. That is the key point. In a sense, building renewables isn't the problem, it's everything else that has to go with it. I think there are two things. First of all, there has to be systematic investment of a transmission and particularly distribution networks. The electricity distribution companies have got a massive role to play here, and it's not clear that they're all at the forefront of this, and Ofgem doesn't appear to be pushing them in this direction either. So I think that is a hole definitely in the sort of policy and regulatory framework. One thinks, for example, of electric vehicles, which if you've got smart chargers, if you've got vehicle grid, you actually aid the transition because they can help fill in the gaps. If you just have a load of dumb charges, you don't. You actually make things worse. But there's no coherent strategy on that. The other aspect really is what are the four things that you can do to balance variable renewable output, which is interconnection, demand response, storage with batteries and water and so on, and peaking gas-fired plants. Do we have enough systematic thought going on to how to get them on the network? I mean, it's worth just thinking, the clean growth strategy that the government unveiled in October, by 2030, that's in just 12 years' time, they expect to have only 15% of our electricity coming from gas. That's a massive transformation. Are all bits of the system responding to that at speed? I'm not sure they are.
It's a big thought. And Melanie, obviously, RSPB gives that 2050 energy vision. That's a long time away. So how did the company go around setting such a long-term target when predominantly, I suppose, the business community is built on short-term ideologies?
Yeah, well, I mean, climate change is a long-term problem and biodiversity loss is a long-term problem, so we really needed to know which direction we were going. I mean, we used 2050 because that's the Climate Change Act target of 80% emissions reductions, and we needed to know that we could get there in the right way. So we needed to take that long-term horizon, and it might become more stringent soon with the Minister announced recently consideration of moving to 100% emissions reductions. So we need to be thinking about those long-term targets to make sure that we're getting there fast enough. And as Richard says, these timeframes are pretty short actually for some quite big systematic changes. So taking the long-term view is really important.
And I mean, that's primarily what edie we are now about, this long-term view. We launched Mission Possible. I mean, we launched a report here yesterday on day one, and we essentially want to help organisations with their Mission Possible. And I suppose just to finish off then, I would like to get a glimpse from both of you of what is your idea of a Mission Possible? What's one area of sustainability that you want to focus on and think this is a goal I really want to achieve?
I think for us, we're really excited by the win-wins. So it's not just kind of making sure things happen to try and minimise damage to nature or, try and sort of block off the opportunities of, runaway climate change and that kind of thing. What we want is the really exciting outcomes where we're achieving a more sustainable society that's better for people, but, rich in wildlife, locking up carbon for the future. And, it's actually the kind of world that people want to inhabit, so people really have something to look forward to. And I think our vision takes us on that pathway.
Yeah, as Melanie mentioned, the government is now embarking on the path to a net zero emissions economy, and the science suggests that the date is going to have to be around mid-century, perhaps slightly before. That's a multi-decadal challenge, but you have to get the short-term stuff done right. So I would be looking for the sort of introduction of policies that actually fit in with that net zero kind of around mid-century strategy. Things like, for example, reintroducing zero-carbon homes. It was the most absurd decision of George Osborne to abolish it. Getting CCS back on track. All of these short-term things now that can lead you to that long-term goal, which climate science tells you is inevitable.
Brilliant. A lot of food for thought. So hopefully this video gets to the right policymakers and we start to see some of those changes. But I appreciate you both need to be over into the Energy Innovation Theatre pretty soon. So thank you both very much for your time.
You're welcome.